I'm going to overcomplicate things for you and suggest the idea that we could have maybe 3 people going for the driver's title this year. And maybe if one team decides to ignore Will Buxton, that third person may not be the one that you think, or we might even see 4 people. Yes, you might be thinking that this video is a bit reactionary to Charles Leclerc winning the Italian Grand Prix, and that it could all fall apart spectacularly at Baku like it did in Montreal after he got his win in Monaco. But given how quickly things are changing race by race, and we're seeing stuff that should be happening next year happening this year, we really can't expect the same old Formula 1 that we saw at the end of the Hungarian Grand Prix. At this point, I feel like Lando Norris is no longer the only guy who could possibly go after Max Verstappen, and no, I don't think it's Oscar Piastri by default. Because I think that Charles Leclerc has a decent chance of bridging the gap between he himself and Lando Norris, and maybe be able to mirror what he was able to do in 2022 and at least be second place in the championship. And I'm so happy that Charles has been able to recover from his terrible triple header experience, impending oversight from Lewis Hamilton, to them being also ranked in 4th place, and then to potentially getting Ferrari back in with a shout at the Constructors title. Whoa, wait, Law, hang on, you're a McLaren fan. Why are you cheering on Ferrari to do better than your main team? It's just like what Sebastian Vettel said, everyone's a Ferrari fan. Deep down, Ferrari is Formula 1, and even though my heart is papaya-tinted, right down at its core, right at the beginnings of my time with Formula 1, I was a well-wisher of Ferrari, and I still want them to do well. I cannot tell you how elated I am to be seeing Ferrari and McLaren, classic rivals, going for not just 3rd or 4th place in the Constructors, but going for the championship. It's just brimming with nostalgia. However, you probably want to understand why I really reckon this could be the case, instead of looking through rose-tinted spectacles and nostalgia goggles. And that might be down to the fact that Ferrari is now starting to look more and more pragmatic, and their strategies as of late have been looking more and more competent. Although I will admit that old habits do tend to die hard, like we saw in Montreal and Silverstone, and I will never forget the quote that Martin Brundle said regarding Leclerc's lot, I think it was at Montreal, and then probably at Silverstone, saying that Leclerc, after pitting in so many times for different tyres that weren't right, was even more lost. Oh! And then Carlos spinning, oh, that was a bad weekend from such a really good one. But what's making me reckon that a lot of Ferrari fans are feeling relieved right now is that their senior performance engineer, Charles Leclerc, who's been around Formula 1 for donkey's years at this point for many teams, has said that the problem that's been dogging Ferrari this year has now finally bitten the dust. Or should I be realistically saying it's been a problem that Ferrari have been horsing around with this year? Sorry, I'll go now. Sorry, that was bad. That was bad! But the team seemingly has found the root cause of their woes that manifested from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards, and thanks to that Italian job, they've got a handle on it. And that's down to that pesky correlation conundrum that's been plaguing most of the grid this year, in particular, and especially Racing Bulls as of late. Did you realise that they brought upgrades for Monza, but then you look at the results they brought and the displeasure that Yuki Tsunoda had, and I'm just looking at that and I'm going, they had upgrades? Could have fooled me. But Charles Leclerc is, well, clear about the fact that the problems have now seemingly gone away, and that any updates they bring henceforth will not be riddled with the porpoising issues that they've been seeing over the course of the season, which they thought they had eradicated at the back end of 2022. They feel their data is more accurate and that new parts won't be affected by the porpoising issue any longer. I won't lie to you. After seeing Ferrari slump that badly in the middle phase of the season, like they did in the second half of 2022, I not only thought that Charles Leclerc would have to make another pilgrimage to Lourdes, which is one of the holiest places in Catholicism, but that he would probably buy rental property there, no, buy a house there, live there throughout the entire season, so that means he can get some good luck. By the way, if you want some context about that, after the Brazilian Grand Prix, where he didn't even make the start, his car gave out on him on the formation lap or something, he then said he had to make a pilgrimage to Lourdes to try and resolve himself and figure out why he's so unlucky. And then the Vegas Grand Prix came along, he then got second place at the last lap, he managed to overtake Checo, so you could easily say that plan worked, so maybe invest in some local property around that area, mate. Seems to work. In any case, Ferrari's now come back seemingly with a car that seems more settled. They've gotten over their issues with what they're getting in the wind tunnel and the data and the computers that Red Bull seemingly has an issue with still, and they seemingly haven't got on top of it. They seem to have given up on it. And now I feel like they might be able to, Ferrari, get back on top of Red Bull and maybe push that team down into 3rd place in the Constructors by the end of the season. 3rd place? Well, that's a place that I haven't heard in a long time. A long time. You might think I'm crazy, but when you look at the points tally, it makes sense. Ferrari are in the 400 club with McLaren, and if we see another Monza where Red Bull can't even breach the top 5, and this coming at Baku this weekend, then major alarm bells will probably be ringing for both Max and Checo, especially Checo since this is meant to be one of his best tracks. Losing the title would be bad enough, but to not even be the runner-up? I don't know what they're playing at, man. Yes, you might be thinking that I'm leaping to conclusions at this point, that after just one race, can Charles Leclerc really make up the difference between he and Max Verstappen? Yes, that is a very tall order, but just a few races ago, we weren't even considering Ferrari in this debate and discussion, but now we can actually talk about it. But it is very important to say that Fred Vasseur, the team principal, is aware that they don't want to get ahead of themselves. He has stressed the importance of not assuming things, saying it would be a huge mistake to assume that Ferrari will win all the time, since he reckons that all 8 drivers in the front-running teams could be in contention to win races still. Now, whilst I appreciate that modesty, Fred, let's be real here. I feel like certain drivers within those top 8 slots will be winning more races than others, and considering that Checo hasn't won one yet, if he doesn't win at Baku or at Singapore, then things might start to get a little bit precarious for that team. I think with this question, the way it was phrased, that Fred was just being diplomatic, non-committal. He wasn't really talking about a technical reason why Ferrari couldn't be ahead, not really talking about the upgrades. He was just trying to be polite. And also, what's become really apparent now, after more than 18 months of Fred Vasseur being the team principal, almost 2 years at this point, is that he seems to go against conventional thinking. Because you know the whole Adrian Newey thing, everyone think it was done and dusted, even I thought that. Well, he didn't do that, and he gave a very fair and reasonable reason as to why. Basically, he doesn't want a power struggle happening at Ferrari, and considering Ferrari's history and power struggles, yeah, I get why. Not only does he ultimately choose not to go with Adrian Newey as the new technical director due to the fact that he was asking for too much and too much control and autonomy, but Vasseur was even prepared to let go of Enrico Cardile, the guy who's currently responsible for the SF24, right in the middle of their troubles. And he's now gone to Aston Martin. And this was just a really bizarre choice, but now it seems to make more sense. Allowing both Enrico and Newey to head on over to the green team, that's a ballsy decision. And reportedly from Ferrari insider Leo Torini via Scuderia fans, Fred let Enrico go as they did not seem to get along, and perhaps that bad atmosphere would not translate well in the long run. Now, okay, when it's phrased that way, even though this is insider information, it's not been fully confirmed, it does seem to make a lick of sense. Fred Vasseur wants to have the trust and faith and goodwill of the people that he works for. Fred basically wants all of his team to be working together and not to butt heads with anyone. Unity and just solidarity. That's what Ferrari needs. And okay, that's fair. He doesn't want too many egos knocking around and that they are the ones that make Ferrari tick. Because we got to remember, if you work for Ferrari, you work for Ferrari. Ferrari does not work for you. It does not better you. You are part of one glorious whole. And I don't think that Adrian Newey, now on reflection, would actually buy into that. And also, maybe Enrico might have left due to the fact that Papa Stroll was offering 5 to 6 times more of his current salary. Yeah, a 500 or 600% pay increase? Yeah, I think he would leave. But seriously, Aston Martin scares me right now with how much cash they have. I'll talk about that in a different video. But if you couple all of that with all of the junior hirings that Ferrari has been making recently, Vasseur's plan to restructure Ferrari with lesser-known hirings instead of big egos is a curious one, and the ones that they do hire that have some sort of notoriety within Formula 1 don't immediately leap out amongst F1 fans as being huge deals. I note the 2 hirings from Mercedes, Loic Serra and Jerome D'Ambrosio. Yes, of course, I know that you know who these 2 are. You have a modicum of understanding about Formula 1 and their significance within Ferrari and them hiring them from Mercedes. But the wider audience, the casual fans, they might not get it. But these 2 men are really, really important, and Fred Vasseur bagging them, as well as getting Lewis Hamilton, is a major big deal, because Jerome D'Ambrosio was meant to become Toto's successor. He was Toto's right-hand man before Ferrari got him, and now he's become Fred's right-hand man, the deputy of Scuderia Ferrari. And then when it comes to Loic Serra, no one was quite sure what he was going to do, but now it's come out that he's going to become the brand new technical director, replacing Enrico Cardile. He's not going to be some backroom employee, no. He's going to be the guy directing where Ferrari goes in terms of performance, as well as with all the other engineers. These are interesting picks, and calculated ones at that, not riding off of the hype train that we all thought Ferrari would continue to ride after John Elkann instigated the move to pick Lewis to partner Charles. For ages, people were thinking that, oh, Ferrari's building a super team, they're getting all the big names possible to make it happen, like they did in the Schumacher-Braun top days. Well, No, Fred's probably hiring really, really talented people, but people that have slipped under the radar and are just really good at their job that they don't need to make a big song and dance about it. So we've got to remember that. Just because we don't know their names doesn't mean that they're bad. In my honest opinion, I feel like Fred sort of sanctioned one big name hiring to show that Ferrari means business, and then just left it in terms of what do the people's resumes and CVs say. And with these men coming from Lewis's former team, it would probably help the driver get acclimated faster and make him feel more harmonious, because I feel like the reality of this move is starting to hit Hamilton hard. Him posting on social media that his engineering room at Brackley won't be his anymore now that the European leg is over, and now we're into the flyaways. And it seems like Fred is aware of this emotional transition too. So having two familiar faces knocking around the Ferrari paddock might help Lewis acclimate himself and get used to the idea. And also, they know exactly what makes Lewis tick, so immediately from day one, they can tell Fred what he needs to do in the time between Fred was the team principal ART in Lewis's junior days to where he is right now. And with Sarah in charge of the technical directorship, I feel like he'll also be able to make sure that Ferrari makes a car that Lewis can gel well with. Like I said in the previous video, I feel like Ferrari have been paying attention to what Lewis likes and doesn't like of the Mercedes cars as of late in this current regulation cycle. That, and to ensure Charles as well is not alienated in terms of the car and that it's completely different and he can't realise its full potential. But anyway, let's get back to Charles. Even though Leclerc has lost a lot of ground throughout 2024, as well as briefly allowing Carlos Sainz to undermine his place at Ferrari even more and making people think that Charles should have been the one that was sacked, and then of course the Monegasque was the second lowest scoring front runner between Spain and Silverstone, that spiral that we were fearing did not materialise in full. Instead, the team has now seemingly gotten on top of the issues that we thought were just classic Ferrari. They were floundering with the pit stop strategies, Charles as race engineer was aggravating him, although he does do it from time to time, but he does actually help in terms of encouraging. The car would fall off and we would be back to where we were in 2022. I'm sorry if I keep repeating that year, but that was probably the strongest year that Ferrari had in a very long time. And I also think that a lot of the groundwork was done by Mattia Binotto, because you can't deny, coming back from that FIA investigation in 2019 and the horrible year of 2020, to then bringing them right back to the constructor stop again, Mattia did do a lot, but Fred Vasseur was able to take that and then put on the afterburners. As a result, I feel like Ferrari and Charles have been able to land a flurry of blows amongst their competition at a time where people just were starting to dismiss Ferrari from any title. First, Charles was able to, with Carlos in tow, send a shot across the bow to McLaren that their team had better watch out since Charles is ready to pounce on any dithering that they might exhibit regarding driver preference, and that Carlos would play his part to complicate the issue further. Second, that they managed to show up Red Bull in fixing a fundamental flaw faster than they could. Sure, Ferrari lost months of development time as well as consigning parts to the bin to do it, but Red Bull still don't have an answer to something which reared its head in full before Ferraris. So now, as a consequence, Red Bull has to pull many more resources from the RB21, just so that means they can fix the RB20 now, and that means the problems don't rear their ugly heads again next year. So development time, cost, resources, it's coming now rather than later, and it's all being shown on full display race by race instead of in private and then released at the pre-season test. It's not ideal. In short, I think Ferrari just made Red Bull look incompetent, and who would have seen that coming? And third, Charles managed to silence his critics, especially the British ones, including myself at some points, that his incoming teammate would trounce him by default. By winning in Monza through a mixture of solid car performance and opportunities which presented themselves, Leclerc stood in front of the Tifosi, thumping his chest toward Hamilton and emphatically stating that this is his team and that even though they will work together to do better for Ferrari, Lewis shouldn't get any ideas. And people were thinking that Lewis would be able to sup the juice of the Tifosi and be able to get some of that Italian magic to be able to improve his performance and maybe back in with the podium chance. But no, that didn't happen. He just about got fifth in a quiet race, and he still had the same problems in qualifying, and he was just down on his luck. He was sad in qualifying, saying he wasn't good enough. He looked weak in comparison to Charles, who looked strong. And that matters more at this race than any other race for Leclerc. Lewis looked dejected and disappointed, while Charles was in a state of euphoria. And that kind of confidence doesn't come around all that often, and is akin to winning the driver's title itself for a Ferrari driver. To win Monza once is special, but to win it twice? Yeah, that's a whole different level of special. And also on an emotional level, it matters so much for the Tifosi because they've seen Charles Leclerc grow up from a boy winning the 2019 Italian Grand Prix to now 5 years later, Charles Leclerc, the man, in 2024. Seriously, Alex Jakes, you are a godsend when it comes to commentating. You make every single moment when somebody wins a Grand Prix special. Seriously, go and listen to Jakes' commentary. He just encapsulates every single bit you want to deal when it comes to a win. And speaking of drivers' titles, where does this leave Charles? Well, this makes me think that Leclerc is not that far off counting himself in with a small shot of the championship. Not a big one yet, but a small one. Sure, he is still behind Lando Norris, and Lando's a fair bits away from Max Verstappen, and you could also argue that Oscar Piastri is closer to Charles Leclerc than he is to Lando Norris. But one thing I have to stress right now is that Charles Leclerc is in a far more assured, content and controlled position than either McLaren driver right now. Right now, Oscar is making a case for team orders not to be imposed. Oscar's making it clear that if he's not told to hold back and protect Lando, he is going to go for the win, for the team. And that is a very important thing to consider. And Lando, he's wanting to play fair, he's wanting to not rely on team orders, but in the grand scheme of things, champions need to rely on team orders for the most part to try and do well. And Lando needs to speak up. But right now at McLaren, there's a real wobble going on. Even though they got one of the best cars out there, probably the best all-rounder, they're not making the most of it. And as that's been going on and McLaren have been dropping wins, they probably should be well ahead in the constructors by now instead of still being behind, even though it's single digits. Ferrari have been able to sort themselves out, get on top of the issues, come up with an upgrade which is strong and looks fairly reassured, and Ferrari have now sort of regained their spirit. And McLaren has squandered that. And now they've really got to be paying attention to the Scuderia as well as Red Bull. And again, Red Bull should have been really thinking about this too. And now they're looking at third place in the Constructors. And probably, maybe, if they're not careful, third place again next year. And what also helps is that Carlos knows his place. And he knows he's on the way out to better places for him. And if Val's had his way with him, he would be leaving before the end of the calendar year. And Ferrari itself backs Charles 100% and will do anything to keep him. That kind of further from Ferrari of all teams is to be cherished. As you can probably tell, both of Ferrari's rivals have some sort of off-track complication going on right now. I've already mentioned it. Whereas Ferrari, they sort of calm themselves down. They of course absolutely had a panic, and you could easily say that if they didn't have these maladies, they'd be probably leading the Constructors by now, making the most of McLaren's fumbles, but Ferrari were busy with their upgrades going wrong to really capitalise on that. So if either Woking or Milton Keynes aren't careful, Ferrari could just swoop in like Kimi Raikkonen did in 2007 and take both championships, at least one of them. Now, granted, this could all fall apart in Baku, which is tinged with some high-profile maladies for Charles, what with his infamous 2019 crash in practice, and his engine giving out in 2022, his strongest season to date, but it is a circuit which he enjoys and remembers fondly from his F2 days especially, as well as having a modicum of solid results in F1. He reckons that he can achieve something special here, and if he were to do that, then I reckon we could see Charles ahead of Lando in the driver's title by the end of the year, given that reliability seems to be better than ever, and DNFs have become as rare as hen's teeth. And most importantly, if Lando cannot convert poles to victories and gain some consistency, and Max's words and warnings are not being heeded by Red Bull, then Charles will be able to make the most of it. Because the point is that Leclerc has regained his confidence, and sure, that confidence can easily be knocked off of its perch, but there is a stable platform in which to get back to where he is, whereas at McLaren, it's all wobbly and lolloping around and inconsistent. We're not quite sure who's going to be backed. Does Andrea prefer Oscar? And then Zach's countering with Lando. There's a power struggle going on there as to who's going to be the most preferred driver. We don't know. Whereas back at Ferrari, yeah, it's an old storybook regarding team orders. They wrote the book about team orders, but at least there's some continuity. Because put simply, Lando Norris right now is really confused. Is he the lead driver or not? And also, this is something I need the foam of doubt for, by the way, because it's a little bit of a shower thought, but I reckon that Max Verstappen is probably okay with Charles Leclerc refinding his mojo and maybe mounting a championship campaign, no matter how quaint it might be. I reckon that Max wants Charles to challenge him. Whenever they're in the top three for either qualifying or the race, you can see the connection that they have. Sure, Max values Lando as a friend and respects him as well, but there's something about the relationship Verstappen has with Leclerc that goes far deeper. They were rivals in karting. They've been through it all, throughout the junior ranks, a major F1 team backing them from a relatively tender age and seeing the future in them, their potential. They were through that gravy train throughout their entire juvenile lives, and now here they are, in their mid to late 20s, right at the top, leaders of their particular squads, and they can now just race and have a great time. Whenever I've seen them, they're deep in conversation. There are smiles going around. There's no tension, there's no drama, because they've already gone through that. They reconcile, they recognize each other's talents, and they are willing to go hard and not worry about them not being friends at the end of the day. Because again, they've done all of that. And I recall the cooldown room after Zandvoort, where Lando is really, really happy and he's celebrating and he's not in the room. Charles and Max look to each other and are just completely nonplussed as to how much they were trounced by. They were in a similar situation and they were both sharing that dejection that they could relate. And I also recall a non-British interview where Max was asked, did you help Charles Leclerc by defending as hard as possible against Lando to make sure that Charles scored loads more points and make sure that McLaren didn't? He then just let out a wry smile and he laughed. And I just feel like, yeah, it might have been a joke. He might not have been doing that, but in a way, I could sort of almost see that he would have done that to try and make Lando's life more difficult and Charles is a little bit easier, since Max wasn't going to be going on the podium anyway, so why not? Why not just throw a little bit of chaos in there, damage limitation, because remember, Charles is behind Lando, and so if Charles can take away points from Lando, then that works out for Max. So okay, it's not an entirely selfless gesture, but it's one, I think, of relative goodwill. But no, that goodwill will disappear if Charles Leclerc becomes an important person who could take the championship away from him. But right now, it's all good. I don't see why Max would not help him. He's probably happy to see Leclerc back in the zone and potentially turning the talk of a two-way battle for the driver's title into a three-way. Or if McLaren continue to remain neutral about it, either the three-way is led by Oscar instead of Lando, or it heads towards a four-way battle, albeit skewed favourably in Max's favour. Yeah, this game that McLaren is playing is a really weird one, and I don't know where it's going to go, but if they're not careful, I think by the middle of 2026, we could see both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris leaving the team, the past is new, after years of so much frustration. Which is something I talk more about in this video here, that you can go and watch right now, and it really pains me to talk about this topic, but I just can't ignore it. I just can't.